And on that note, we are done. Y'all have a great rest of your Sunday. Gosh, between Josh, Darby, all of you guys, thank you so much. If everyone could please take a moment to scoot to the edge of their pews for a second for me, just real quick, just a little bit. Perfect. I can say that I moved y'all today. Yes. Hey, I had to, okay? On a serious note, though, my name's Korey Ogden. Thank y'all so much for allowing me to come share a few thoughts with you today. As you've seen and heard so far, our theme is centered around light and how we shine our light on other people that we interact with on a daily basis. For me, leading by example has always been the most important way to make a profound difference in the lives of others. We look at the example of the life of Jesus Christ during his time here on earth, and we take his teachings and his experiences, and we still use them to inspire how we choose to live our lives. I'd really like to thank first all the youth and everyone who's involved for all of the hard work they put in over the past couple months. We've had a great time over the past couple months, and as you can tell, this is a small but really great, talented group of individuals, so they really put me to shame. Today's scripture comes from a smaller, lesser-known book of the New Testament. If you're flipping quickly, you may zoom right on by it. It's a letter written from the Apostle Paul to a man named Titus, and it's packed full of really good insights, but it's only 3 chapters. Today's reading is from the first chapter, verses 7 through 9. I use the New International Version of the Bible, which states, "Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it." I also love how a newer, more contemporary version of the Bible, the Message, puts it. It says, "It's important that a leader responsible for the affairs in God's house be looked up to, not pushy, not short-tempered, not a bully, not money or power-hungry. He must welcome people, be helpful, be wise, be fair, reverent, have a good grip on himself, and have a good grip on the message." Now, everyone here today may not be a church leader, but we can all be leaders within the church. We can be leaders in our communities. We can be leaders to our friends. And God gives us some really easy ways to meditate on how to do that. So let's break it down a little bit. All of us would probably say, if someone asks us, that we're helpful, we're fair, we welcome people into our lives, we greet strangers. But are these the adjectives that other people would use to describe you if your name happened to come up in a conversation? Or are there other things that people would say that keep your brightest light from shining and being the best example to others that you can be? Today I want us to think about this in 3 key areas: the things that we say, the things that we do, and the things that we don't do that we should be mindful of. One of the greatest people, in my humble opinion, to stand at this pulpit and share with you guys is someone that I really admire, who's acted as a great example of someone who shines their light to others. And that's my grandfather, Charles O'Rourke. Many of you may know him. He's sitting there in the back. Whether or not he's realized it, he's been a really profound influence and inspiration to my life. And it's just a great example how you shine your light just by living what the gospel says every day, and how that can guide someone's every thought and step. We first heard him speak many, many years ago at Arnold's Valley Baptist Church. That's where he met my grandmother. And for any of you who've ever heard him speak, it's definitely not something you'll ever forget. I probably won't even come close. He'll be 83 here in a few days, and he's still, you won't fall asleep. He's the most dynamic, enthusiastic speaker because he really cares. He's never afraid to just express his feelings and opinions and say what needs to be said, but he always does it in a way that will help someone. He has always been so supportive. He's a spiritual leader, great heart, and he's always been so good to my grandmother and my whole family, and that's made a big impact on us. And so for that, I'll always be grateful. Plus, the two of them together is about the craziest, funniest thing you'd ever see. For those of you who know him, please ask him after service about mashed potatoes. I'm not going to say anything else about it right now. Just ask him about mashed potatoes. But who do you have in your life to act in that same way as this type of example? What things can we be mindful of to lead by example to others that we come in contact with, like he's done in my life? First, the things that we say. With Josh coming on board as the interim music minister here, it's pretty obvious that this church is going through a period of transition. Churches are constantly changing the dynamics of the worship and the leadership inside of the church. One thing is constant, though, in the midst of change. God is the manager of the church. His holy leadership is what reigns over this place. We must keep in mind the true reasons that we're here, to fellowship with one another, to set our lives free and for souls to be saved. During times like this, we really find out what everyone's made of and what they can really bring to the table. Are we helping or are we hindering this process? Verse 13 in Titus 1 tells us to speak sharply, to be sound in our faith. The word sound in Greek is where we get a lot of English words like health, healthy, hygiene, is what we say firm and straightforward, but yet healthy and clean. Sometimes people say things that are foolish because they're mad, they're disappointed, they may be upset with someone else or at something else. Sound speech comes from sound doctrine. Titus 1 told us that we must hold firmly to the trustworthy message it has been taught and oppose those who don't speak that way. Sound speech and sound doctrine has a really encouraging and uplifting effect. People take notes on the things you say, whether or not you realize it. So it's much better to be caught maybe saying something nice to someone than cussing at someone or talking down to someone. Ephesians 4:29 gives us this encouragement. Do not let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful in building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. I know as a kid, for me, being here in the South, I had my mouth washed out with soap if I ran my mouth or talked out of turn. And I think there's probably a few more people that need to go back to that with having their mouths washed out, at least from what I see. Do people at work and school see you as a Christian? Do they trust what you believe in Jesus Christ is based on your speech and your deeds? Or do they see you as selfish or maybe prideful? Pride is something I think we all know about. It's the oldest sin in the world. In fact, it's older than the world, for it was Satan, who was the most beautiful angel of them all, to sin against God. Remember Adam and Eve? Don't need to go into that. There are 93 mentions of pride or being proud in the Bible, and none of them is with a positive tone. We're all prideful to some degree, though. I mean, who doesn't like to have things their way? I know I sure do. But those who are truly prideful trust themselves and not God. I'm sure we all know someone like that who believes that they're in control of every move that they make, or that there is no higher power, there is no God that's looking over their lives and shaping things for them. I know that sometimes even myself, I catch myself using God as like a 911 God. I call on him only when I need something or when I really want something, and like he's a magic genie or something. And when we speak the power in God's name, we also should exercise it. I know that everyone in this room has told someone, I'll be praying for you, and maybe you forgot to lift up a prayer. And that's really easy to do. And sometimes it's even worse if someone comes back to us to thank us for our prayers, and we don't even remember the struggle that they had been going through because we brushed it off. Pride comes when people prioritize their popularity or their positions of power and their possessions over God. Eliminate the you in these situations and channel your love for God to your love for those who are in need. Offer your sympathy and compassion and ask God to work in their lives. Secondly, the things that we do. One way that we can ensure we're bringing our best is by being hospitable. Romans 12:13 states, share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. The word practice is really good because I think that's something we can always continue improving. We're here in the South, as I mentioned, the Southern hospitality that we're known for. Are we embodying that? Are we sharing with people? Are we loving others? When we offer our hospitality, we must do it in a way where we're not complaining about it, where we truly do care and love for people. Do you realize how many people in this church here may be sitting here today considering themselves lonely? It's human nature to talk to people that we already know or that we consider to be our friends. But we must also reach out to those who are strangers to us. I would hate to think that someone could walk into this building and left lonelier than when they arrived. I can look out and see faces who aren't even from this county. So I hope that they feel loved today too, just like so many people come to this place for the love. We must be a lover of good. A good example must spend time with things that are good and love those things that are worthy in this world. Philippians 4:8 tells us, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Paul's letter to Titus states, in everything, set them an example by doing what is good. Aren't you thankful that God does good things in your life? Some of you may have a difficult time believing that today because you may be going through some struggles, but God presents us with so many good opportunities. We must be self-controlled. This must mean remaining level-headed, sensible, temperate. I know I haven't perfected it. I know I certainly never will. But for me, it tends to take a lot to rile me up. I'm a generally very calm person. You can ask my family. It really takes a lot to hype me up. But it is attainable for everyone. For me, it's a demeanor. It's a trait. For everyone, it may not be. But it's something that we can always practice and get better at. Aristotle once said, "I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies. For the hardest victory is victory over self." We must be disciplined. Roy Thomas, for any of you that may know him, he was an interim pastor at Buena Vista Baptist Church, where I'm a member. He was also the man who baptized me as a Christian, once said, "Make better your good to achieve your best." Being disciplined is being able to say no to things that are wrong and being aware of what is good. I know this can be a lot easier said than done, especially in this day and age. I only graduated high school 7 years ago, and I still, with the youth here, see how the world is transformed. I didn't have Twitter. I didn't have Instagram. Text messaging was brand new. Even for me, Facebook was brand new. I didn't have a lot of these luxuries, and it's so easy with social media to look into things wrong, to take different sides. I know there's tons of people in here who probably have a Facebook and use it, or text message, and it's so easy to read into that the wrong way. So we must be disciplined, and God tells us that maintaining fairness and eliminating pride, even if we get jealous at seeing something on Twitter or whatever the case may be, it has rewards of its own by maintaining that fairness. We must be humble. Humility is the first step to salvation. During the summer of 2007, I had a really bad car wreck. I was a new Christian. I didn't know much about anything really at all. I was driving home late on the evening of July 4th. It was a cool summer night. I had the sunroof open, listening to music. Next thing you know, I flip and roll down a ravine about 2 miles from my house, going about 55 miles an hour. My Ford Explorer that I love so much was completely destroyed. With the sunroof open, the only thing that I could smell was burning metal and hay from this field that I'm rolling down into. All the doors were crushed when I finally landed upright. The windows were still intact, but the doors were crushed in. The whole passenger side was completely crushed in. The only part of the vehicle that was virtually untouched was the spot where I was sitting in the driver's side. I had no injuries. The only injury I got was crawling out of the sunroof, and I cut myself on a piece of glass. That's the only injury I had from that whole thing. And when I looked up at the moon and I slid off the side of my vehicle, looking at this total mess, I landed on my feet and immediately fell to my knees. Now, part of it was shakiness from being terrified of just having a major car accident, but part of it also, I just look up, and I knew in that instant that God was in control of my life. And he works in our lives in some really mysterious ways, and asks for so little in return. And by humbling ourselves, we leave more room for God's presence and power to shine through to others. And lastly, for the things we do, we must give our times and talents to the Lord. Everyone can do something. God has a place for you to be a part of a church family and fellowship. It helps you grow as a person, and it helps you grow as a Christian, and I can be a testimony to that. I would have never grown as a Christian without jumping in and being involved in my church. Everyone has unique gifts and talents and experiences, and you've seen that even today with the youth that have been up here. The church at the other end of the block, Lexington Presbyterian, has this amazing sign over the door. As you leave, it says, "You're now entering the mission field." For me, that has always made such a profound difference from the beginning of my journey as a Christian. It not only means that we need to be active in a church, but that we should spread the gospel to others we see. Everywhere we go is an opportunity to tell people. And that's so cool, to live by example, to shine our light onto others. I was not raised in a church. I joined Buena Vista Baptist, was the first church that I was ever a part of. And I can see how much of a difference it's made in my life and even the members who were there just by participating. It's what Christ set us out to do. And lastly, the things that we don't do. When I thought about this section, I was really overcome with joy thinking about some really warm memories. And Josh Harvey will know exactly what I'm talking about. We served a mission together in the summer of 2010 in the city of Cincinnati. And our theme for the week was undeserved, based on the parable of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 10. During that week, we talked a lot about different stories in the book of Luke. And the parable of the Good Samaritan was the first time this trip was the first time I'd ever heard about it, and it really stuck out to me. It struck me really deeply. For those not familiar with the story, a man has been beaten and robbed and left to die on the side of the road. A priest passes right on by. A Levite also looks and passes right on by without lending a hand. But it's the Samaritan man, who was from a race despised by Jews in this biblical time, who put the man on his horse and walked him into town and put him up at the inn and gave his own money and time and told the innkeeper, "If more money is needed, I'll come back and pay it." And for me, when I heard that story, it just, from head to toe, I was tingling, because what an amazing lesson and story for all of us. Although we may not see injured people on the side of the road every day, how often do we turn our heads to tragedy and despair? Sometimes we neglect compassion for others because we can't relate. The Samaritan was from a despised race, as I mentioned, and Jews consider them to be dirty and unholy. Maybe the Samaritan could relate to the man who was left to die and who was beaten on the side of the road because he felt so often that way himself. And I'm sure if the Samaritan and Jew had been in opposite positions, there would have been a dead person laying on the side of the road. I'm sure the Jew maybe wouldn't have given the Samaritan even a second glance. Many times we miss opportunity by not lending our compassion. The Samaritan, knowing the suffering that his people had been through, probably would have felt guilty for not stepping in. There probably would have been this burning sense of regret filling him for what he had done. Compassion feels something. It does something to us. There's a big difference between being religious and having a true relationship with God. And many times we miss the opportunity to demonstrate our relationship with God by not showing compassion for others in a sticky situation. I'd like to conclude my message with an article from the New York Times taken 50 years ago that we can still learn a lot from. It says, at approximately 3:15 on the morning of March 13th, 1964, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was returning to her home in a middle-class area of Queens, New York. She parked her car in a nearby parking lot, turned off the lights, and started the walk to her second-floor apartment about 35 yards away. She got as far as a streetlight when a man grabbed her. She screamed, "Oh my God, help me, somebody, please." Lights went on in the 10th-floor apartment building nearby. Windows opened, and a man's voice said, "Let that girl alone." The attacker looked up and ran out down the street. Miss Genovese struggled to get to her feet. The lights went back off in the apartment like nothing had happened. Seconds later, the attacker reemerged and yet again stabbed her. She again cried out, I'm dying, please, someone help me." And again, the lights came on and windows opened in nearly all of the apartment complexes as people peered out. The assailant again left and got into his car to leave. Kitty staggered to her feet. 15 minutes had passed. It was now 3:30 in the morning. The attacker returned once again. He found her passed out in the doorway at the foot of the stairs and stabbed her again, this time with a fatal consequence. It was 3:50 until the police received their first call from someone living in the apartment complex. They responded quickly, but Miss Genovese was nearly already gone and died en route to the hospital. Could she have been saved if the neighbors had acted more quickly? Although this is an extreme circumstance, how many times do we open the window to look, maybe stir up a little commotion and yell just to feel better about our efforts, but we actually don't do anything to fix the situation? In closing, we've all been in situations where we could use help from others, but maybe we were left to fend for ourselves. As Christians, we're called to do so much more for others in need. How do you demonstrate your relationship with God? Can people see your love for Jesus in the things that you say, the things that you do? In everything, remember that people observe you and want to learn from you, no matter how insignificant you may feel and whatever age you are. Leading by example is the most powerful way to pave a path to God, and shining your light will open the eyes of many who don't know Jesus Christ. I urge you, even in your darkest moments, to not forget that, to remember the story and life of Jesus Christ and his teachings and experiences here on earth. You can touch lives and change people for the better, just as he did.